to interview the four artists in their studio spaces, which actually was an incredibly important part of the research. It was a kind of, I guess it was sort of field work in a way, but it became a way of sort of nailing down and identifying some of the key sort of points. So this is another piece by Jessica Stockholder. It's an installation of her work that was at the Saatchi Gallery in 1998. And I guess for those people that don't know her work, it's a series of large-scale assemblages and installations, which I think you could describe as being sort of sculptural painting. And this is a piece from PS1 in 2006. This is Lydia Donner's work. Again, at the time, I suppose I saw there were a lot of women artists making sort of work from a critical position using photography and text, and there seemed to be a kind of chromatic subduedness, for want of a better word, which, in a sense, the black and white and a reduced colour scheme became a kind of code for sort of seriousness and criticality. So I guess at the time I found this use of colour, of a kind of quite flagrant and unapologetic use of kind of modernist forms and formats as being quite refreshing and also quite surprising. I mean, going back to '92 when I was looking at this work, I mean now I guess this work appears a little bit dated in a way, or certainly very familiar. But at the time it seemed very refreshing and a kind of welcome sort of shake-up to what I think had become quite a moribund approach to image and object making. And I suppose I was interested in looking at the kind of political, either the overt or the covert political readings and agendas in these four women artists' work. When I went to interview them, some of the artists were quite resistant to a political reading, and some were very keen to encourage that. So there was a very broad range of responses to my research question. And that piece by Lydia Donner is entitled "Nomadic Drips and the Molar Loss of Driftings, and its Oil and Acrylic Paint on Canvas." And I think both Stockholder and Donner have a very interesting approach to titling their work. They have this almost sort of excessive sort of wordiness that degenerates into something kind of almost meaningless, both from different positions on this. But I think Lydia Donner was very much reading painting through Deleuze and Guattari and a kind of post-structuralist position on a kind of creating a kind of conceptual painting, if you like. And her work references, I guess, sort of metallic surfaces, sort of, if you like, kind of the synthetic colours of fabrics and cosmetics, but uses a very severe set of frameworks that relate back to post-painterly abstraction, gesturalism, and minimalism. So she's throwing a kind of mix of outsider or peripheral elements into this mainstream space of painting. This is a piece by Lisa Hoke, and it's called Manifold Destiny. And I think what this piece really sort of embodies a kind of this sort of rather irreverent and a kind of humorous approach to dealing with the history of modernism. So really, I guess one of the essential sort of issues that kind of resonated within my research was how do you think about your position in relation to painting and modernism as a woman artist who's interested in the politics of painting and representation, and without separating form from content. And I suppose as an artist who in some senses sort of would always resist a purely formalist reading of work, I was, I guess, caught between two positions, that of something quite formal and something else that was very anti-formalist. And I think both those positions are kind of the same position, if you like, on the map, because in a sense, both a kind of formalist and anti-formalist position separates form from content. So, and this was something that I found problematic, and I felt that these artists had solved the problem in some way. It's another piece by Lisa Hoke, and it's called Interlocking Parallels, and it's made from zippers, a curtain rail, and part of a chair. And I suppose if you could say that Jessica Stockholder's work was sculptural painting, Lisa Hoke's work is painterly sculpture. Again, there's a kind of a familiarity, I think, that we have now with this work, that it seems to have been something that's been assimilated into a kind of language of the way that people are working with painting. And I think what you have now is a situation of painting as a kind of expanded field, a sort of a discursive and procedural territory, which so people can make paintings from the position of constructing objects, making video works, drawings. It's a kind of it's a framework, but also it's a set of languages and a set of codes. It's a grammar and syntax. Now, you're probably waiting for me to talk about the relationship between theory and practice and how that operated in my work. And I suppose what I would say about it is that, and I'll pick up on that a little bit later on in the slideshow, is that I think that for me, that I found that there was, and there always has been, and still is, a porous space between studio work and written and reading work. That I don't think you can separate those two spaces. And I think on thinking back to my experience as a BA student and an MA student, it was never really a problem. That it was always assumed that there would be a relationship between one's thesis and one's studio work. That now I think the problem with a PhD level course of study is that becomes much more formalised, and there's a kind of an anxiety that ensues. And my own experience way back in the early 90s was because I was one of the first PhD students to go through the system, was that I was a bit of a guinea pig, and my supervisors really didn't know how to work with this, and it was a bit like, they use the term, was it suck it and see? We'll see if the theory fits, see how it all hangs together. And I think this for me was quite an unsatisfactory experience. That I said to somebody earlier today that it was a bit like, studio work and theory had been invited to a party, and it was just hoped that they would somehow get along in some way, which I think puts an incredible burden on the researcher. I think that it does need to be structured, or at least negotiated. And I think that the mutually sort of interdependent nature of one's studio work and written research needs to be treated as something that is constantly in a state of negotiation and flux, and is mutually sort of interdependent. You can't separate the two in any way. And I think this is one of the exciting things about doing a PhD program of study, because it's a kind of experience where that although you're monitoring, you're how can I put it? It's as if your studio work is both the subject and the instrument of research. So it's, on the one hand, you use it as an objective tool, but on the other hand, it's something that's incredibly subjective. So you have this shifting position in relation to your studio work and your written research. But I think this is something that all artists do sort of naturally, if you like. And I think that students coming onto a PhD program need to have a body of work that is, or a kind of an activity as an artist that is essentially quite a coherent practice. I think that if you come hoping that it will give you a practice, then I think that's going to be problematic. I think you have to come as an artist with a practice, and that practice will generate a research question and a set of issues. And there are numerous different ways that this can go, but anyway, more of that later. I think I have some more slides to show. One of the other artists that I met and interviewed and wrote about was Deborah Cass. All the artists were based in New York, and all of the artists had a very particular relationship to kind of American modernism, to colour field painting, to post-painterly abstraction and post-painterly pop. Deborah Cass basically was exploring her Jewish identity as a woman artist through the language of Andy Warhol, as you can see. So what she did was she took various icons from Jewish history and represented them through Warhol's language. So it's quite a straightforward agenda, if you like. But it was through talking to Deborah Cass and meeting her in her studio that I developed the idea of drag, because as she said to me, basically we're all in some kind of drag, that gender is a form of impersonation of which there is no original, it's a series of copies. And this was a real turning point in my research, and I'd been reading Butler and Althusser prior to this, and I started to think about, well, maybe what these artists are doing is a kind of form of cross-dressing. They're deliberately using masculinized art forms that are coded and framed as masculine, and they're sort of dressing up and cross-dressing. So